Richard Lawrence Bartholomew, 1926 to 1985, art critic, photographer, poet, and painter. Richard Bartholomew escaped from Burma around the time of the Japanese invasion during the Second World War and made New Delhi his home. Here he earned his bachelor's and master's degree in English literature, and after which he began his career as a full-time art critic, writing for various newspapers, journals, and magazines. His creative writing includes poems and short stories published frequently in journals like Thought and Illustrated Weekly of India. As a painter, he held one-man person shows in New Delhi and Bombay in the 1950s and 60s. He recorded life around him as a photographer, including his family and artist friends. A Critic's Eye, a selection of his photographs, was exhibited at the Sepia Gallery, New York in 2008, at PHOTOINK, New Delhi in January 2009, and at Chatterjee Lal in Mumbai in 2010, at Harrington Street Arts Centre in Kolkata in 2010 again, and at Fishbar Gallery, London in 2011. On to you, to Jatin Das, to say a few words, because there's an old friendship that he had much before, I think, knowing you, Pablo, and I think there's something there for us to share. Thank you. Over to you, Jatin Das.
Richard Bartholomew was married to Ratidi.
You'll have to speak louder because you're on a bad network zone.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. When I went from Bombay to Delhi, I lived in Nizamuddin, East, and Richard and Ratidi, they lived in Jangpura, next to Ghulam Rasul Santosh and Ramachandra. And Pablo and his brother Fatty, these two kids, and Ratidi was a professor, and she was very deeply involved in theatre, and she's from a Brahma family. And as Pablo said, Richard was Burmese and a lovely person and a very dear friend of mine. I remember I had a dog in Nizamuddin, and Richard called it Nizamuddin Mongrel. Yeah. Now Richard wrote as a critic for Times of India. He was paid 30 rupees for a review. But one thing was very special. Nobody interfered with his writing in the editorial department, other than spelling mistake or grammar. But his reviews appeared for every exhibition next morning in the Times of India. Since Richard is gone, the Times of India do not have any review or any critic since then. Richard will come to a party after my exhibition, but after he submits his review, then only he'll come. And he was very ethical, very particular. And I think he was born 29th or 30th of November. He was a Sagittarian and a person with fantastic sense of humor, but never was rude or curt or rough to anybody. He was a very gentle person. Nizamuddin, East, West, and Jangpura was a ghetto of artists. I remember he worked on Shakespeare, and he had a big fat book in which he had many writings and corrections on every line of Shakespeare. I remember that book. One day I remember Richard was working with watercolor, another day with oil, and when I arrived in his house, he said, "I'm not competing with you, but being a critic, to know how a color is used or an oil used. This is an art." The third thing was he had thousands of slides, photographs. There's one photograph of me and Gaitonde and Nandita as a tiny baby in my studio, which was photographed by Richard Bartholomew. So Richard Bartholomew had straight hairs sticking out of his head. I did a couple of portrait sketches of him maybe 40 years ago. Richard were untimely. Other than being a critic, when he gave up criticism in writing Times of India, he became also the secretary of Lalit Kala Academy in New Delhi. And I remember, if any one of us holding an exhibition in the gallery in Lalit Kala would come and bring 10 of his staff members, and to the extent he'll have a small bottle of rum which he would share quietly with me. He was a fantastic man. That period and that kind of persons, that kind of friendship do not exist anymore anywhere in the country. You know, Richard Bartholomew. So, and if I recollect correctly, Richard used to have fantastic cameras, he used to photograph. And I think it is his cameras that Pablo took over. And he has to acknowledge that. And that's how he became a photographer later on. It is Richard's cameras. That's another thing. Then, during his time, Lalit Kala was very active. There were no private players in the art world. Lalit Kala, National Gallery of Modern Art, these two institutions were very active and everybody ran for it. Today, they're totally neglected and everybody has disowned these institutions, and that's how it is. Now, returning back to my art center, our art center, the JD Center of Art, we have had many stalwarts in the Meet Artists program, which is held every month on a second Saturday. And we had last time at Khanna, the great artist, living artist who is about 97 years old. And as I said, this ghetto of Nizamuddin and Jangpura, many artists live in proximity. And we visited each other almost every week. Now, Richard was a photographer, was a famous critic, and a poet, and a dear friend. Now, over to Pablo. And since online, many people all over the world listening to it, and now collaborating with India International Center, it has gone international. So Pablo, now you please take over. As you were talking many things, maybe I will recollect from your presentation. Thank you, Pablo.
And before you start, Pablo, just by way of disclaimer, because your talk, a lot of it, Baba, was a bit choppy because you, just to tell the other listeners that you are sitting in Jahangir Art Gallery where the network is very bad and you're sitting in your exhibition. So that's why.
Could you hear it all?
You could hear parts of it, but most of it. And so do bear with all of us. And then he and I will mute ourselves, and Pablo, over to you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay. Pablo.
Thank you. Thank you, Jatin. Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you, JDAC, for inviting me to, sorry, JDCA, for inviting me to remember my father. I mean, it's great because I have a parallel sort of event happening in Bombay, which is an exhibition of my photographs on the Nagas. And there I talk about, in the wall text, about his leaving Burma, coming to India, and how he passed through the Nagas. And that's one of the reasons why I actually went out of curiosity to the Naga people, is to find out who these ferocious tribes were, headhunters, and how come they let my family, my grandparents and my father through without harming them, but actually were very hospitable, helpful, and gave them safe passage. So tomorrow is the last day at Nine Fish Art Gallery. Those who are in Bombay, It's open from 9:30 to from 10:30 to 7:30. Do catch it. And there's a wonderful interview of my Scottish aunt, which I made some years ago, and she recounts her journey through that same march that many of the people made for over a month it took, and recounts the Naga people and how horrified she was to see some of the things that she came across. So what I'm going to do is start actually with the Burmese side. And as I walk you through, you'll understand and realize how I encountered my family, which I thought may have completely disappeared, because once my father died, I had no way of actually making contact. Can people see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, lovely. So this is me at the beginning of everything. As you can see, the animal chain. My parents, we went to Almora, which is a hill station near Ranikhet, for our summer holidays, and my father took this self-portrait of us. My younger brother, Robin, wasn't born yet, so there are only three of us. My mother reading Thought magazine, and Thought was a very vital and important publication in the 50s and the 60s. My father actually ended up editing it. My mother used to write on theater. My father used to write on art. And then my father went on to editing it for a few years. My father, probably in one of the hill station homes, summer homes that we stayed in, he would carry all his books, do his writing, photography. That's me with the box camera. And like Jatin mentioned earlier, yes, I learned photography at home. That's our dark room at the back, and enlarger with chemical bottles. And I'm holding a box camera, which was gifted at something like age 6 or 7. And that's my journey into photography. These are the countries that through my mother and of course through my father, I'm connected to. My mother came from Pakistan after her father decided to leave Calcutta and move back to Sargodha with his family. And then, of course, my father came as a refugee. And my mother, again, when independence happened, came as a refugee. So me and my brother are double refugees. When you lay over the map, this is what it looks like. I have still relatives in Pakistan. Of course, I live and work from New Delhi. Then we have relatives in North Bengal, in Cooch Behar, in Calcutta, in Bangladesh, in the Chittagong Hill Tracts. And then, of course, as I found my family, or my family found me in Burma, and right from the south to the north, as you will see shortly. So as it happens, one summer evening, I suddenly found an email in my inbox. And this was written from a lady called Hazel McKay. It came from her son's email address, James McKay. And I sort of looked at it in disbelief. Here I was, 25 years after my father had died, you suddenly get an email saying, I'm your aunt and I'm trying to connect with you. It was two thoughts went through my head. One was disbelief that this was a hoax, and the other was shock that somebody had made contact. This is Hazel on the left. As you can see, it's one of the two pictures that she sent me. The other two pictures were her parents. And Hazel, as it turned out, was a great beauty. She had won many beauty pageants in her area in Burma. And this is her at age 70 when she, just before, I guess, tried to reach out to me. What followed were family trees, and I won't get into the details, but it lays out the 5 children, mostly women, and how they all married. One married Scottish, one married Irish, one married English. So I started to search about the family history pretty soon after my father died. One of the sites I found was at this Anglo-Burmese website, which kind of, the circle has my grandfather's name, and it was an evacuee list. So I tried to further, when I was in England at one of my visits, go to the India Office Library and trace what is called the registers of evacuees from Burma. There are 2 parts. This is part 1, which has the European, Anglo-Burmese, Anglo-Indian, and other non-Indian evacuees. And the second one is part 2, is all the Indians that were in Burma that left. As you can see, bottom third 25 second 27-5, you have Bartholomew, Mr. and Mrs. W.H. and Master R, which is my father. Another sort of pullback view of this document. And my grandfather, William Harris Bartholomew, was in the Burma Railways. Ironically, like you had a lot of Anglo-Indians in the railways here, I guess Anglo-Burmese were in the railways in Burma too. And he retired as Chief Engineer, Burma Railways, but was at various designations and sort of, posted different parts of Burma. This is the Great Gotek Viaduct, which is in the north of Burma, in the Shan country, going towards China. Here's an early picture of, when I went back to Burma, they all started giving me photographs that I could copy. And this is one of the photos that was sent to me. My father, as a young boy, seen in the front, holding a solar topi, looking very grumpy. One of the aunts on the extreme left is smoking. Diagonally above my father, holding the little girl with his 2 hands, is my grandfather. That's a photo of my grandfather and his wife, William Harris Bartholomew. In the family, they said he had a rank of a major, but and his wife, Do La Kin. But I got from an Australian source a forensic done on the uniform that he was wearing. And in the next slide, you'll see it. This also I used as a poster for an exhibition that I did in Yangon in 2015, using the participants photo albums. So they all brought in their photo albums. We all sort of looked at the work and tried to make an exhibition. It was quite interesting as it happened. This is the sort of analysis of the uniform. I know it's a lot of words to read, but I'm just going to go into the next slide. But basically, it gives him the rank of a lieutenant in the Burma Engineers, which was under the British Army. And a lot of it talks about the kind of coat and the pants and whatever the officers would wear. But it's sort of interesting how people can read photos and get all this information and put it out there. Another view of the Gotek viaduct as it was being built. And these are all from the India Office Library as I went in to do research on my grandfather and his railways. So this is my grandfather and grandmother. For a long time, I thought it was my father. The similarity is just amazing, but eventually I realized it couldn't be because these photographs, you know, the timeline, my grandmother could not be of the same kind of age as the male here. So it had to be my grandfather. My grandmother and her sister, another aunt of mine, my grandmother, another aunt, same aunt. And then bits and pieces started to come. Here was a visiting card that I found of my grandfather, which I guess was from the time that he came for my parents' wedding, because it has care of modern school. Of course, it's modern. There's a misspelling there. And the designation is District Engineer, Burma Railways. And he was at that time posted in Mandalay. And then he has these three initials, WKH. And I tried to figure out whether it was something to do with the railways. And then out of research in one of my trips to Burma, meeting librarians, museum folk, I found out that it was a title that was given as an honor, a civilian honor called Wana Cho Thin. So that's the WKH. It's like, I guess, a Padma Shri or whatever equivalent here. So I go to Thailand. I start this conversation over a 2-year period with this cousin of mine, James. And he says, you know, I run a golf course. So I'm a bit polite and I don't ask him whether he's employed, he manages it, or he owns it, until I arrive into Thailand from Sydney. I've gone for a photo festival there. And I'm still kind of apprehensive, trying to figure out, you know, is this a hoax? And James says he's going to come and pick me up in Bangkok at 9 o'clock in the morning, and he arrives at 6 and he wakes me up. And as it is, I'm apprehensive and I sort of start to freak out, wondering now what's going on. So I go down and I tell James I'm going to pack up and I'm coming. And then one of the first things I do is, as I bring my bags out, is I say, James, let me take a picture of you. And I pose him next to the car that he has come in, and also get the driver in the frame, take a few pictures very quickly. And in the next instance, I'm emailing them out to friends saying, hey, this is the car that's taking me. This is the guy who's come to get me. Um, at the golf course, I meet two of my relatives. They are also visiting. There's Juliet, the girl, and her husband. And they also come to visit James. So this is the first contact that I have with my Burmese side apart from James. Unfortunately, the aunt has left in these 2 years and gone back to Burma. But I meet Juliet and her husband. This is a view of the golf course. And then, of course, the golf course is very close to the River Kwai, and that's famous for the bridge over the River Kwai, the Second World War movie. And of course, we go there, and here's Juliet and her husband walking the bridge. There are war memorials around the bridge. There's a war museum, which is a private museum about the bridge, the prisoners of war, the peace temple that has been built. And the station is peppered with photographs and illustrations like this one and this photo. And again, another photo of the train. And as you can see how crudely these bridges were built. And I did a little kind of number with photos on this rail line because the more I learned about it, the more fascinated I was, because it was called Death Railway. And this transported prisoners of war as the railway line was being built by these prisoners of war towards Burma and into Burma. Coincidentally, a Bora man and his wife were on that train when I was traveling it. Then this was a year later, then James and me decided that we would meet up in Burma and actually go full blown through the country, meeting all our relatives. And James had not been back into Burma, though he lived very close to the Burmese border. Kanchanaburi is very close. For 25 years, he had self-exiled himself because of his family connection to a very prominent Burmese family that he came from. It was dangerous for him to go for many years. And then as he grew up and grew his business and became an entrepreneur, he got busier. And so I was in a way a catalyst for him to, for us both to go back to Burma. The lady with the white hair in the foreground is Hazel. That's his mother, and that's the lady who wrote to me. That's a whole set of relatives. And as you can see, Hazel's here in the foreground. Lots of photos. Everywhere we went, lots of photos started coming up, and I couldn't keep track of who was who. This is Auntie A. And James has my iPad with my grandmother's photo and is sort of trying to show the similarity of facial similarities. The school that my father went to, St. Paul's, which is now run by the Burmese government. The railway headquarters, which was disheveled when I photographed it, now has been turned into an upmarket hotel, but I don't know what state it's in because it was under construction, and with all the troubles in Burma now, I don't know what will happen. The house where my grandfather lived in that railway headquarter compound when he was chief engineer. Another group of relatives. And yet another group, my big fat Burmese family. I'm the only beard in town, it seems. Very few Burmese have hair, and neither did my father. Yet another relative family. And as you can see, they use photographs very interestingly. All their graduation pictures. One of the sons is a naval officer. The marriages, everything sort of. And I found this phenomena going into Vietnam, Cambodia. There's a way that they display their whole genealogy on their walls. Another group photo. And then we get into a van. This was all Rangoon and around. And then we go to Mandalay to meet more relatives, more group photos. And there's the second to the left is a father in terms of a priest, though most of them are Buddhist, but there is this interesting mix between Buddhist and Christianity. And in many homes I saw that you could have both on the walls. There would be a Buddhist shrine and there would be a Christian shrine next to each other, both religions being practiced. This is James's father. He was looking for the grave. And Burmese have their Christian name and their Burmese name. So U Sunny is Mr. P. Mackay. And this is the first time that James is seeing his father's grave, and it's a very emotional moment for him. We go up to the hill station above Mandalay, and there you still have these horse-drawn carriages, and we meet our relatives. And then we go south and we meet relatives that are less prosperous, like Soso, who runs a street side restaurant. And in one of the relatives' house there is stored this trunk, which they say belonged to my grandfather. It was from his army days. And then we go finally furthest down south to Tavoy, which is where my father was born. My grandfather lived and died after he retired, and nobody knows where the place is. So we're trying to look, find, phone people. Finally, James's relative, U Baswe, was a very well-known and important minister. He is also from Tavoy or Tavoy, and we go to his house. The caretaker then takes us to the house which my grandfather owned. So I know some of this may look very boring, but it's a journey that I undertook, and full of discoveries of people and family. And the last part is in 2016, I went back for a wedding. This is a cousin getting married, Auntie Betty and her daughter, who's the bride. And then a week later, Aunt Hazel, the woman who found me, Hazel Ann McKay, dies. So I go to a funeral, which is in the back of the country. I have to take a flight. I'm picked up, driven to this village. That's James and his brother, and James's brother's sons. The burial, and that sort of ends that whole cycle. So the woman who found me is now dead. Coming back to India, this is back in Almora, our summer home, which we rented for a few months. It was called Snow View Cottage. And my father would paint, write, photograph. I remember actually watching him make contact prints of the photos that he had taken. He would run the film to the local photo studio. They would process it. He would bring that back and then make contact prints by kerosene lamp in the evening, and then put the paper into these liquids, and it was like magic that images would come up. My mother, which is also the cover of his photo book, A Critic's Eye, and this has been titled Rati in a Sari. My father took lovely images of all of us, me, my brother, my mother. Here she looks like out of a Satyajit Ray film. This is probably in another hill station in Dalhousie. Again, somewhere in the hills, in one of the rivers. My father was very fond of fishing, and we would go on to occasional fishing expeditions. Again, in the hills, I think this is one of the principals of St. Stephen's College, who he was very friendly with at that time. His wife, his daughter, my mother here. I don't know the other people standing and bending over, but again, up there in the hill stations. Ram Kumar, the artist, used to come also, and there are pictures I have of Ram Kumar, my mother, taken by my father. This is me as a young kid. My brother, me. I just needed two horns. That's what's missing. Me, and we used to get help from the hills. They used to come and live with us, and I still remember him, Mathura Das, a very gentle and kind man who looked after us as we grew up. My brother looking very grumpy at, I don't know whether it is Kalka railway station. So obviously we are going up towards Simla, and there's me in the background and the help who looked after us. I'm not sure if this is my brother, it could be, and one of my parents' friends fooling around in our old Delhi home in Banarsi Das estate. Again, me, my mother, and my brother who's half hidden. Me and my mother. My brother and me playing in the bathroom. My brother. And our father photographed a lot of us reading and sleeping. So there's a whole series. In fact, the gallery PHOTOINK did once on reading and sleeping. There's a whole series of pictures. As you will see, this is another one from it, where I'm reading a photography magazine and my mother's reading a very intellectual comic. Other than us, my father photographed all his friends, and many of them, of course, were in the arts. This is Matba, who used to work a lot in clay. Of course, Hussein. So this is probably sometime in the late 50s, early 60s. Um, the name is going out of my head, but an artist who lived in Jaipur. Ram Kumar, when he had his studio in Gold Market. Rakshat Puri, the poet, and a very close friend of my father's. Again, Rakshat Puri, somewhere probably outside of Jaipur. And in those days, the sand dunes, before Jaipur got developed and built, Jaipur had a lot of sand dunes. Birande, outside his house in civil lines. And there was this kind of tussle between Birande and G.R. Santosh. Both were working from the landscape to figurative now into their tantric phase. And there was immense rivalry between here's Santosh, the Kashmiri artist, and here's one of Santosh's works. This is at the Lalit Kala. I think he was sort of touching it up before it was going to be hung. Satish Gujral, again in that sort of post-figurative tantric phase. Birande, Sabawala, and Krishnan. Souza in a studio in New York. Krishan Khanna, who some of you may have listened to as The Last Talk, painting with a poster of Che in the background. I think this may have been he did a whole series around Che. This is Sridharani Gallery as it used to be. Of course, now this wall is covered up. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, I had a show which I put together for the social work organization from Thilonia, Barefoot College or SWRC, Social Work and Research Center. There was no windows, it was just wall, and I had these bamboo frames and panels of photos printed out. Hussein having a show with Suvira and Shiv Kapoor. Shiv Kapoor co-authored the Harry Abrams book on Hussein with my father when it came out in the 70s, I think. Harry Abrams publication. Hussein with goggles. Hussein with his shirt off. Hussein walking around. I think this is around Asaf Ali Road. There used to be this huge graveyard of broken doors and windows, all from government buildings which were being sold here. Ramachandran, Chameli, and my mother, when in Jamia, when my parents came back in the end of 72, early 73, we lived with them for a short while. And that's how my father photographed some of this. This is The Last Supper, Ramachandran in his courtyard of his house. Jairam Patel and Nasreen. Jairam Patel at his home. He used to live in a lovely house in Baroda within, I think it was in the university campus. It was an old colonial house. Nasreen Mohammadi. This is Ram Kumar at Krishan Khanna's house. It could be out of one of these French movies, Truffaut, Renoir, the sort of lighting, the kind of clothing, the glasses, everything. Lakshman Pai behind one of his paintings. Bal Chavra. Manjit Bawa. Krishna Reddy and his daughter. Gaithonde. And this is the picture that Jatin was speaking about, which is Gaithonde, Varsha Das, Jatin, and the young Nandita. Swaminathan and Satish Gujral at one of the shows. And this is the way people would hang out. I think this was the Lalit Kala Academy canteen, and that's Mona Rai on the left. Here you have Dhanraj Bhagat, and I don't know who the other person is in this sort of embrace. They're all very animated, and there was a whole period when a lot of these, the artists would get together, a lot of alcohol would flow, tempers would get fired up. And I've been, as a child, witness to many strange happenings that I dare not even speak about publicly. Jairam Patel with Vivan Sundaram's sister Navina, and I forget who the last person is. They're all reading each other's hands or palms. He's gone out of my mind, and that's a very well-known professor from Florida who came to teach, and also he wrote a book on the history of Indian art. Beyond these portraits, my father photographed just about everything, right from our homes, objects within our homes, like this is a kitchen of ours, the kerosene stove and the kettles. And it was just, a way of looking and seeing. This is on Kashmiri Gate. It's a very old leather a shop which sell leather goods. And these are all the people that they were kind of, whatever, what is the term? Anyway. And in Jantar Mantar, the graffiti on a tree, a night scene with lightning, again, another night scene, and this is one of the most evocative images that with the two figures which are sort of blurry, the cloud, the moonlight. It's one of my favorite photos of my father's. Banaras, you don't see these kind of boats anymore. Bombay.
Actually.
Sorry? The Imperial Hotel, as it used to be in the 60s. Narendra Place, now you have this huge DLF building, and the view from where my father's taken this photo is the Park Hotel. So all this is decimated, and to the right is Jantar Mantar. Hath gadis or hand-pulled rickshaws in Mussoorie. You don't see this sort of rickshaw anymore. or just, plates, bowls, bottles, the cat, a dog. I think this is Ramachandran's courtyard, if I'm not mistaken. Or through a jute tent, which has been patched up, which is I think the interior is a classroom. And this is somewhere in Gujarat, maybe Baroda, Ahmedabad, I'm not sure. In Bhopal, at I think this is their tourist guest house. Or it's not Bhopal, maybe Sanchi. Again, Gujarat, street, a sadhu, a palmist, somewhere maybe in Connaught Place. Shop display. Kotla Mubarak, it's still a timber market now, but what it used to be like in the 60s. I think Chandni Chowk. The problem is that, when your parent has died, there's really very little information that you can get, and you get peripheral secondary information. But by looking at the signage, magnifying certain things, looking at the street and trying to figure things out. And that's a huge loss, even with his writings, there's so many gaps. And I wish I could have had him around to fill it. But then it is what it is. This is on Ring Road. This building is still there. It's somewhere near the School of Planning and Architecture. Madras or Chennai, the backwaters. Banaras, Lodi Gardens. A sign with sparrows. I think this is near Amer in Rajasthan or next to Jaipur. This is a Tibet house when he was the curator or development officer, as they called him there. And this is preparing for the inauguration, and Mrs. Gandhi would come when she was information and broadcasting minister. This is just a wall of our living room with where everybody sat. Very abstract. I think my father's eye really kind of matured in the 70s, and especially when he went on this Rockefeller fellowship with my mother, and he photographed the street there like a real street photographer or documentary photographer. This is in the Metropolitan Museum. Mother and child. Street scenes. And the kind of complexity of his visual language and eye kind of really matured. That's Times Square then. It always was very seedy till it got cleaned up. As you can see, there's always black protest and trying to get white America to understand. And this is a cryptic photo of a self-portrait in the New York apartment where they lived. This is the book that I created with 3 galleries of his work called A Critic's Eye, and many of the pictures that I've walked you through are in this book. It's very interesting. It's a small publication, but it flows beautifully and it's been edited and printed very well. The other book that I did was on my father's writings. That's a huge 640-page book. And for the opening, we had Ramachandran Krishnan Khanna, Ram Kumar, and Ashok Vajpayee moderated. And of course, there's my mother with the book in her lap. And that's me getting her to open the ribbon of the book as the inauguration. And we had many people come, Satish and his wife, many of the other older artists came, and I had put together a video of interviews with these artists about my father, which is playing right now. That's the book. And this is what Jatin was referring to. My father sort of circled these words and had some code. I have no idea what this is. Nobody has an idea what this is. But there are 3 Shakespearean tragedies. This is, I think, from Macbeth. And there's through these 3 Shakespearean tragedies which have circles. And I used one of the pages from Macbeth, which seemed very graphic, as the book cover, an enigmatic book cover for this book. That's the back cover with a note from Hussein. I self-published it. We distribute it on Amazon. So if any of you listening in still want the book or want to refer a friend, it's there. Our bookstore on the store on Amazon is called Bart, and we are the cheapest of. So we sell our book at 1925, 1925. If you go to Bahari, you end up paying 3,000. Maybe he'll give you a 10% discount, but we can beat discount. So look for Bart and buy the book if you want to. For the last part, I'll go very fast because I think we're kind of nearly out of time. My father had this, being a refugee, I think he had a special link for Tibetan refugees. And in the 60s, he took a job where one of the things was to visit all the refugee centers across India, well, mainly in the north. And part of what Tibet House did was they had a handicraft shop where they had carpets, silver goods made by Tibetans, leather stuff, paper work. And then, of course, you know, in one of his many trips in Dharamshala, this is the opera. The Dalai Lama coming to Delhi to inaugurate Tibet House. And you could see at that time, it was a simpler time, no security, no fuss. Here is this monk arriving at New Delhi railway station or Old Delhi railway station, and, you know, just himself. The ceremony at Tibet House of the inauguration. And then, as you've already seen this picture, this is the evening function. At this function, you can see second from the left, Mrs. Gandhi. She was the INB minister then. His Holiness is in front. I forget the guy with the glasses who's next to His Holiness. And then there used to be this annual fair. There was this carpet fair, and then they had the Tibetan dog competition, the Upso, which is the Tibetan guard dog for the monasteries. This little yappy thing. A lot of fuss would be around to, see who is thoroughbred. And the person, a lot of diplomats and foreigners kept them as pets. Carpets being shown, more carpets being displayed at Tibet House. The Tibet House was in a very nice, it was, I think, 14 Johor Bagh, which is one of the front houses of Johor Bagh on Lodi Road, just diagonally across from one end of Lodi Gardens. That's the King of Bhutan. That's Mrs. Gandhi arriving at one of the many. There would be, my father would take the displays of His Holiness's tankas and bronzes to Bombay. This is at Jahangir, where Jatin is now. And it would be at Ravindra Bhavan, and Mrs. Gandhi would come and inaugurate it. I remember playing with gold dust. There were these mountains of gold dust in these large thalis. And as a kid, running my hand through gold dust, quite an amazing experience. Again, this may be Ravindra Bhavan, and again, the carpet and clothes. New York, and I did this sort of edit, a little quirky little thing, which I'll run through super fast. Domogeshe Rinpoche was the director of Tibet House, and my father and him went as evangelists, taking His Holiness's collection and other objects to museums. And then they would put up this sort of, the museum was put up these very interesting and elaborate exhibitions of objects, tankas, bronzes, and then to a Tibetan monastery in Staten Island with Domogeshe Rinpoche there. And of course, there's a Russian Orthodox church in the background, so this seems to be a rather religious site. Domogeshe Rinpoche walking through the famous cemetery in Washington, and Domogeshe Rinpoche looking at Mary in a museum. That's them in Japan. And of course, he derobes, which usually monks don't, but for some reason he had to or did. And this is the way I laid out the exhibition. To the left is my father's Tibetan work. To the right is my work at a museum in Paris, the House of Photography, or Maison Européenne de la Photographie, as it may be called, a long and elaborate name. So, I'm still working. This was 2017, and I'm still working on other things. Now I'm tasked with working on my mother's writings, since she died in September of last year. So that's how it goes. How do I get myself back in? Anybody out there? Oh.
Hello. Hi, Pablo. Thank you very much for this. We naturally got an insight into your whole family and the way the parentage was, but also, because I think my generation of people weren't exposed to your father, kind of the entire repertoire of work. And I'd naturally heard about your father a lot ever since I was a kid. So it was this kind of mythical creature for us. And I think there are certain things that you've not touched upon, but him as his writings and his poetry, I guess. And I think was there a sculpture exhibition, or it was the Tibetan sculpture exhibition that you mentioned, and I think all his
No, there was
photographs
a
of Krishna.
sculpture, contemporary art. So that
That's
is
all.
Lalit Kala. I couldn't find that image, unfortunately. I tried to look and look for it, but I was able to find your father and Nandita, that image, and I was more pleased that I found that.
Yeah.
So, and that's more relevant in that sense to you and Jatin now.
Yeah. No, of course. And no, it was just for the others just to kind of know, because when I was reading up on your father, it was quite exciting that him doing an exhibition on modern Indian art at the Royal Academy, and or doing an exhibition of his work, like just the whole entire span of things. And I think my father is also trying to somehow unmute himself, because I'm sure a lot of things will bring back memories for him, and he'll be itching to say. But in the meantime, if anyone has any questions for Pablo, please just unmute yourself. You can all switch on your videos if you'd like, and please ask away. There. Is that video? Baba, did you have anything to ask?
No, it's very nice. There is a total loss. The generation of people, many of them are gone. And today, there's no recollection in the contemporary art scene. And so it was a fantastic time. It's like yesterday, it's all gone. Thank you, Pablo. Thank you very much. And also another thing I forgot to mention, which Pablo, Rathidi's family had some connection with Mayurbhanj, where I come from. Rathidi's grandfather or something.
No, it's not. Let me explain that, Jatin, because I made a trip last year to Mayurbhanj.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, the thing is that it's an aunt of mine who married the Maharaja of
Keshav Chandra Sen's
This is Keshav Chandra Sen's youngest daughter.
That's right.
But she wasn't allowed into Mayurbhanj until much later. And
that's right.
And that's why the Raja built Belgravia Palace, which is now still up and running.
Yes.
Where I've been to, and I saw some things that you had written in, or a drawing or a book you had given them. So it was part of trying to trace certain letters and what have you. This is the endeavor to sort of work on my mother's side, which is sort of more, how would you say? I'm a bit shy to mention royal, but it is what it is. Unlike
that I knew.
Father.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Pablo. Thank you. Very kind and reminiscing. And it was beautiful time in Nizamuddin and Jangpura. And his contribution to writing on art was extraordinary. Other than being a poet, photographer, and many other things. Thank you. Thank you. And I spent many, many days, many evenings with him. And he used to come to the house after my exhibition, but he will go and deposit his review at the Times, then only he would come. Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful. Take care.
Any questions?
There's a question by Vasant Nayak. Would you like to ask yourself? You put it in the chat box. I can see. Vasant Nayak.
Hi, Pablo.
Hi, Vasant.
Hi. What a fascinating story. And I'm really curious, did you ever have a chance to discuss photography with Richard?
Me and my father rarely spoke about those sort of things, though there was a lot of chatter about photography. Every Sunday, there would be the artist Jagmohan Chopra, and then there would be Rakshat Puri, the poet-writer, and my father would get together. And they would talk about photography, art, everything sort of And I was just much more of an observer because I was much younger. By the time I sort of, grew up, I had already fled home. So there was very little conversation anyway. And my father was far too busy trying to firefight in the Lalit Kala Academy, which was really the reason of his demise. But that's another whole area that I don't want to get into because it's still sort of open wounds. And the whole thing of engagement with the arts and the state and all of that. A lot of that he's addressed in his book, The Art Critic. But to answer your question, no, there wasn't very much talk. It was a lot about watching him. There was like popular photography. We had the encyclopedia, Focal Press Encyclopedia. A lot of it was sort of, mastering the technique. The theoretical end of it was really, you didn't much care about it. It was more practice. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, thanks, Pablo. That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There's also Parvez Hazarika had something to say. Would you like to voice it?
Hi, Parvez. Here are the two people from very far away. Parvez, it must be very early for you. And for Vasant, it is less early. But I think Parvez is in the West Coast, so it's super early.
Yes,
Tell
indeed.
me.
Well, it was not a question. It was more an observation. Out of the Burmese pictures, for example, the galvanized iron perforated sheets that people use as property, what do you call it? Boundary walls. That's the expression one would use in India. We find those in Assam up to this day. These were actually, they used to use this during the Southeast Asian theater in the Second World War to create airstrips in the jungles. You clear out a jungle and make airstrips so the Spitfires and all that could land. And a lot of that soil was waterlogged, so you would sink normally. Even a person could sink in that soil. These holes in these sheets actually prevented the thing from sinking.
Right,
So
right. They were often used in pathways, also in roads, so that the trucks could go without, creating huge cavities in the soil.
That's correct.
Yep.
Plus the features of people, having been to Nagaland as well as, I'm from Assam actually, it reminds me so much of Southeast Asia and the Northeast in terms of people's ethnicities are so similar, the looks and all that. And it's fascinating you mentioned the Konyaks. Actually, didn't mention Konyaks as such, but they were the headhunters in Twensang district. And likely your father came up the Imphal Road into there.
No, he took what was called the Lido Road, which then became the general Stillwell route. And that was a march. At a certain point, it was just dirt tracks. Then it was built into a road, and that road then connected Kunming in China. So the Chinese had been isolated, and it provided them a gateway to get supplies. And at that time, in World War II, the Americans and the Chinese were friends. They were cozy with each other against the Japanese. So how the world, goes around and changes.
Nandita, you had something to say. You've written in the chat box. Would you like to say it yourself? Shall I read it out? Okay. I'm going to read it out in case she joins, in case she can say, then she will say it herself. She writes, "Thank you so much. I have many wonderful memories with your parents and they're still fresh in my mind. They all came alive." So that's from Nandita. There's Leela Kabir Fernandez. You've written in the chat box. Would you like to ask yourself?
Hi, Laila.
Okay, I'm going to read it out in case she comes in, then she can. Please remind us of Ratidi's Bengali connection.
Okay, God, it's, I've sort of dealt with that end with kid gloves, but here it is, since you've asked. My mother's great-grandfather was Keshav Chandra Sen, who was a Bengali reformist and a leading member of the Brahmo Samaj. The embarrassment of the family was that Keshav Chandra Sen went, after raising the marriage age with Ramon Roy and one of the Tagores, married his daughter underage to the Maharaja of Cooch Behar, his eldest, thereby creating an uproar and a schism within the Brahmos, and then the Brahmo Samaj fractured into three groups, the Nabi, the Sadharan, and one more. But anyway, so I come from that end of the spectrum, and the second eldest daughter, who is I'm directly related into, married the cousin of the Maharaja, and in Cooch Behar also. And then the youngest daughter married into Mayurbhanj, so that is where the Jatin connection is. So I would think that Keshav Chandra Sen was a royalist, because, you know, he had his kids marry, three daughters marry into two royal families. And thereby I have this umbrella of royal connections, some very interesting, into the Chakma Raja of the Chittagong Hill Tracts, Devashish Roy, who I've been actually visiting over the last several years and working within the Chakma group, using textile photographs in some of my work, newer work. But then again, that's the family link. And then it goes into Tripura, it goes into Manipur. So there's this huge kind of basket through this Bengaliness. I hope that answers your question, Laila.
There's a question.
There?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yes.
There's a question from Udit Kulshrestha. Would you like to ask?
Hi, Udit.
Okay, I'm going to.
Hey, Pablo.
Okay.
Yeah, tell me.
Thank you, firstly, so much for sharing your journey about your father. I mean, I have seen some of his earlier works that you've shared, and also some of the family archives that you've shared. But this today gave me a wider perspective of the whole journey. And I had one question, which was something personal about your father in terms of humor. And I kind of sensed from his photographs that there was a certain sense of quirkiness which was visible in the pictures. And did you witness this firsthand sometime? Because you did mention that you were a witness, mute witness at that point of time. Anything you remember you would love to share?
I think some of his writing has that sense of humor. And I guess, you know, he had a wicked way of speaking sometimes. I can't give you an example offhand, but I wish I had that too. Mine, unfortunately, went on the acerbic, cynical side, lashing out much more. He was quieter, gentler, and I guess more sophisticated because of his ability to use and juggle words.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There's Lekha Bhagat. Would you like to say? You've written in the chat box and she had a comment. Lekha, are you there? She's there. But would you like to say, Lekha, yourself?
No, it's just that I wanted to say thanks, Pablo. It's been such an incredible journey, and you're having had to work really hard to get all these pieces together. But I'm absolutely fida on those photos, those black and white photos. They are just stunning. And anyway, so you are a worthy son. I have to add that.
It's called Daddy Puja.
Keep on to me. What did you say?
Daddy Puja.
It's called Daddy Puja.
Daddy Puja, did you say?
Yeah. Well, most
But
Indian
can you
sons
imagine if your Abba ever heard you say that? I mean, he's probably
turning in the grave. But
he'll be laughing his head off, I'm
well,
sure.
most people usually go towards the mother. The mother is the revered, and the mother indulges in the son. I think in my case, I went very, very rapidly towards my father for one photography, which was the main catalyst. And then, of course, once he was no more, I got the negatives with which I had to do things with. I got his writings, both my mother gave me. And of course, with his writings, I worked with my mother. Then she had a stroke. And so the project went on and on. If any of you have the book, read my afterword at the end. It sort of gives you the kind of tango and the twists and turns that one had to go through to do the book and eventually self-publish it, because most publishers or people I went to said, what? A book of art writings? What is it going to do? What is it? Well, so eventually I had to do it myself, and I'm very proud that it is now the, as some people call it, the Bible of the birth of modern Indian art, in a way. And it's a great resource for academics to commercial institutions like auction houses, galleries, you name it.
There's a question from
But it's so reasonable. I mean, at 1925. But I have to tell you that the critic's eye is like, I don't know, 8,000 or something like that. I think.
No, that's I don't have any copies. I didn't do it. So the galleries that did it have their own copies, and if I had, I would be putting it out there as reasonably priced, so that more and more people could have access to it.
No, but I shall be ordering today on Amazon. It's fabulous, it sounds. So thank you. And thank you, JDCA and Siddharth and Jatin. I hope you're having a wonderful show, Jatin. And thanks, Pablo. I'm looking forward to your book on your mama.
Well, let's hope. Fingers crossed.
I know. I can't believe what you have done with your parents, how you have, brought them alive for us. Thank you for that. Okay, bye.
There's a question from Varsha Das. Did you get your first camera from your father?
I guess it was my father. You're too young when you get gifts to sort of compartmentalize them, whether they came from this side or that side of the parents. But yes, I got a camera and I was very happy to have it. And maybe it was a joint gift. But it did, fare me well. It sort of, I remember my father was really horrified the way I used it, because I had taken some photos in fairly low light. And he said, how did you manage to do that? So I said, oh, Dad, I just put it on B and I pressed the shutter. And B is for bulb, where the shutter remains open till you release the shutter. And I guess by accident or good luck, the exposure was more or less right and I didn't shake the camera. So he was rather surprised that technically I was able to do that. I didn't realize what I had done, but I was just happy that I had interesting, good photos. So, you know, sometimes good things happen.
There is someone called NM. Are you there? If you're there, please ask away yourself. Otherwise, I will. Okay.
Hi, this is Niyati.
Ah.
I was just wondering if you've ever thought about doing a documentary. I remember seeing Louis Kahn's documentary done by his son, and I was wondering, you know, because it would be a visual treat as well as include writing and works. So I was just wondering if you'd had that thought. The other was that the Library of Congress, the British Library, and others actually, if they knew of your work, I'm sure would buy it online. I think it needs to spread globally. And thank you very much for an absolutely fascinating and captivating journey. Thank you for sharing it.
To answer your question, yes, I would love to do a documentary. The problem really is funds, or to find the right kind of fit, who has done enough research, is sensitive enough in photography, in art, in writing, in poetry, to kind of approach it in a multifaceted manner. Unfortunately, I haven't seen the mix here. So, you know, it's never happened. Whether self-financed is out of the question, but to find the right kind of documentary house or channel, you know, they don't exist here. So for that reason, things have been not approached. I have played around a bit with video, but frankly, to tell you, I'm not great at it, and I wouldn't want to end up doing something mediocre. I try and do what I can do and do it as well and as much as I can. So that's where the books have been. I also have to get on with I'm the most underpublished photographer, and I need to, in the next 5 to 10 years, get a load of my books going. There's my mother's book, which is now something on theater that I need to look at. So there are so many projects and there's only one of me. So I try and do whatever I can.
All the very best, and I hope we will hear you soon again.
I hope so too.
Thank you very much, Pablo. It was a fabulous thing. And I hope that someday we will get at GD Center of Art a lot of the old beautiful pictures that your father took of his contemporaries, because I think there are lots of works that are there. And I think that whole I think that kind of camaraderie that was shared, which comes across in the photographs, which is, as Baba was saying, that, you know, which you kind of almost, it's so endearing and we kind of miss it today. So I hope at some point, you know, and I hope that you get to visit JD Center of Art also at some day.
I would love to.
Time we will open. So yeah. And anything, Baba, would you like to add? Don't know. He's possibly booted out of the gallery by now. I would reckon. But thank you, Pablo. Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Thank you, everyone.
All
and
right.
Look forward to having all of you, if you can, on the second Saturday of every month for Meet the Artist lecture series. Thank you and bye-bye.
Okay, bye everybody.